Probably the most widely held end-time view is that the final 7-year tribulation or 70th week of Daniel will start with a Middle East peace treaty. No matter what a person's rapture view is, most hold this position. Given the nearly constant discussion of this issue on biblical sites and the recent news media coverage of the Middle East, in this video we need to explore the biblical basis for the question, will the tribulation begin with a peace plan? Although the majority of Christians seem to hold this view, there isn't a poll that clearly defines how they feel on this issue, so we're going to do one right now at the beginning of this video. Click on the banner when it appears to take the poll, then keep watching. Now that you've taken the poll, let's think about the implications of this issue. First, many believe the rapture will occur prior to the tribulation. So if it starts with a plan, this causes these folks to anticipate the rapture anytime a peace plan is discussed. Social media then is filled with such claims, all of which make Christianity look very bad if nothing happens, which has been quite frequent as of late. Second, the beginning of the tribulation is kind of like the 2-minute warning in football. It's a time when everything changes and new strategies need to be put into place. Get this wrong, and you are either totally unprepared for what will happen, or you will be totally disillusioned when nothing happens. Third, because most also believe it is the Antichrist who will broker this peace plan, you will likely assume one of the main characters is the Antichrist, Trump, Kirshner, or Netanyahu. If you're wrong, however, the real Antichrist may rise undetected, and you may be completely deceived, having your eyes focused on the wrong men. So as you continue to watch this video, remember there is a lot at stake if we're wrong. A tremendous amount. So let's begin to explore this question together. Will the tribulation begin with a peace plan? Now, for the vast majority of you who are convinced the 7-year tribulation will begin with such a plan, I'd like to start with Jesus' own words on this issue. And there aren't any. None. When Jesus was specifically asked by his disciples about what signs would precede his coming, he said nothing about a peace plan. Don't you find that more than just a little bit odd? A peace treaty would be a worldwide recognized event, an obvious sign. But when specifically asked about signs, Jesus said nothing about it. If this is important, and in fact crucial, why did Jesus leave it out? And the book of Revelation says nothing about a peace plan either. The most extensive and final teaching on end times, and again, nothing about a peace plan. And Paul's epistles contain nothing about peace plans or treaties either. Now, in fairness, Paul does mention peace and safety in 1 Thessalonians 5. However, he mentions it in relationship to the day of the Lord, when the sun and the moon are darkened, and when sudden destruction in the form of fire and brimstone occur. Not at the beginning of the tribulation, which we know is simply the release of false prophets and messiahs, not destruction. So the entire New Testament is silent on the issue of a peace plan before the tribulation. Again, don't you find that more than just a little odd? So why do the vast majority of Christians expect a peace plan to usher in the tribulation or 70th week of Daniel? That last statement is our clue, the 70th week of Daniel. The prophet Daniel was given the most specific timeline of the last 7 years in the Bible. And it is in Daniel that we find the only possible mention of a peace plan. An anonymous he makes or confirms a covenant with an equally anonymous the many. for the entire 7 years of Daniel's final 7-year period. The most common understanding of this passage is that the he is the Antichrist and the many are the Jews. That isn't the only understanding, however. So many have spent their entire lives searching for a second scripture to confirm that this is the correct understanding. The reason is that, as Paul tells us, a fact is only confirmed by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. So in vain, scholars have searched for that confirming scripture, only to find nothing. Will the passage in Daniel ever get a confirming testimony? I believe it will. In my opinion, the 2 witnesses of Revelation 11 will finally provide the second and third witness testimonies of what this passage really means. Is this why Daniel's scriptures are sealed? Perhaps they are waiting for the witnesses to unseal them. Until then, though, I think it is somewhat guesswork to assume what this means. So at this point, you are in one of 2 camps. After watching this video so far, you are now unsure if the tribulation begins with a peace plan or not, or you are still adamant that it does. It is for these in that last camp that I want to show you more. So if you're in this adamant camp, let's take a look at Daniel 9:27 again, because everything hinges on this one verse without a second witness. And it hinges on one word, actually, on the word he, which most assume means the Antichrist, because that is what they've been told it means by their teachers. But let's look at the entire verse of Daniel 9:27, and when we do, we see something fascinating. There are actually 2 characters in this verse. First, there is an anonymous he who does 2 things. He makes or confirms a covenant, and he puts a stop to sacrifice at the midpoint. And there is a second character, a one who makes desolate, who both comes on the wings of abomination and upon whom a complete destruction is poured out. Now almost everyone agrees this second character is the Antichrist. But if that's so, who is the he? You see, they aren't the same person. The one who makes desolate doesn't come on the scene until the abomination of desolation at the midpoint. So who is the anonymous he who strengthens the covenant and stops the sacrifice at the midpoint? This is a very complex subject to understand, and that's why there's so much disagreement. We explain it completely in my book 70 times 7, which is available on Amazon, and that book presents my complete understanding of Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy. But for our purposes here, let me give you a quick explanation. Daniel tells us there will be a covenant, and a mysterious he will either make one or strengthen an existing covenant for the entire 7-year tribulation. The ancient Hebrew and ancient Greek texts both imply it will be a strengthening of an existing covenant, not the making of a new one. So who is this he? The word must refer back to someone earlier in the text. The last person listed in the prophecy is the prince who is to come. The verse says, "Then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary." This is why everyone says it's the Antichrist. It was his people who destroyed the city and temple, the Romans. Isn't that right? Well, maybe not. And I know that is shocking to you. Let's see what Jesus said. Let's see who he said will destroy the city. When speaking to the Pharisees, Jesus told the parable of the wedding feast and how the invited guests, the Jews, refused to come, and they killed and mistreated the king's messengers. Jesus continued that the king, God himself, was enraged and sent armies to set their city on fire. So according to Jesus, it is the king, Yehovah, who sent the armies and set the city on fire. This is confirmed by the Septuagint Greek text of Daniel 9:26, which says the Messiah will destroy the city in 70 AD with the leader who is coming, Titus the Roman. You'll notice here that nothing is said about the people of the prince who is to come. So, who are those people? Well, according to Flavius Josephus, the famous first-century writer and witness of the destruction of Jerusalem, it was the Jews themselves who were responsible for the temple's destruction. They may not have thrown the torch that burned the temple, a Syrian soldier did that, but here are his words. There was a certain oracle of those men, the Jews, that the city should be taken and the sanctuary burned. Here you can realize he's referring to Daniel's 70-week prophecy, of course. He continued, when a sedition should invade the Jews, and their own hands should pollute the temple. And they made themselves the instruments of their own accomplishment. In other words, Josephus blamed his own countrymen for the destruction. They were the people of the prince, the Messiah, who is to come. That prince, of course, was Jesus. Now let's return to the book of Daniel to see how Jesus is the only one who can be the prince who is to come. In Daniel 9:25, Jesus is given two titles, Messiah or Anointed One, and also the Prince. Then in the very next verse of Daniel, verse 26, these roles are separated, representing the two comings of Jesus, one to die on the cross as Messiah, the other to return as King to rule the whole world. Unfortunately, just about everyone misses that. But the words Messiah and Prince found in verse 26 are identical to the words found in verse 25. They are the same. It is the same person. The prince who is to come is Jesus, not the Antichrist. So Jesus is the prince who is to come, and that makes him the he in Daniel 9:27, who strengthens a covenant for 7 years and only 7 years. Now, how does he do that? That is outside of this video. Pick up the book 70 times 7 to find out. As we stated at the beginning, a tremendous amount is at stake in this question, will the tribulation begin with a peace plan? And I don't think anyone should assume that it does, or that anyone who signs a peace plan is the Antichrist. These are dangerous assumptions, as we stated before. So if the tribulation doesn't start with a peace plan, what might be the sign? Believe it or not, the Bible doesn't tell us directly. The first sign Jesus does give, however, is that false messiahs will arise. In Luke 21, he says, many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and the time is near. A possible 21st century fulfillment is that Islamists believe a man named Isa will come on the scene in the last days and claim to be the historic Jesus, who just happens to be a Muslim, and say that the end times have begun. This is the sign that all Muslims, even moderate ones, are waiting for to rise up in worldwide jihad. That sounds strikingly like what Jesus prophesied. Might that be the sign? Well, maybe. However, remember, the Bible doesn't give a sign of the 7 years having begun. Jesus only gave one clear sign to watch for, and it is at the midpoint. He said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place. That is what all believers are to watch for, and it is the same sign mentioned in Daniel 9:27. On the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate. As we saw, that is the revealing of Antichrist and the beginning of the Great Tribulation. It is the one sign everyone should know and watch for. So hopefully after watching this video, everyone will now be wary of believing that a peace plan is the sign. Now that doesn't mean I don't believe that there will be a peace treaty. I certainly do. I just don't think it's the sign of anything. So until next time, this is Nelson Walters for the Gospel in the End Times.